Hi, everybody. Welcome to Vision 360, where we look at cybersecurity from every angle, starting with the foundation and extending through corporate governance and beyond. I am your host, Matthew Webster, and I focus on solving cybersecurity governance by helping organizations align cybersecurity with business strategy. This means emphasizing governance, resilience, communication, emotional intelligence, and practical risk management. My approach is shaped by decades of experience in the field, including several chief information security officer roles. I've worked with leadership teams through training, workshops, assessments, and direct advisory support, always with the goal of making cybersecurity a strategic asset and not a technical afterthought. So in today's episode, we'll be focusing on CISOs speaking up when reporting into a technical function. There definitely can be a lot of issues there, and it does extend beyond that in many cases, but it definitely is an issue that is a repetitive epic within the cybersecurity community. In many cases, speaking up can become a resume generating event for CISOs and definitely can be challenging in the role. The causes of this are many, but quite often it's around bursting the illusion of perfection that technical function is created around the environment. So they've said, hey, we're fantastic, and the CISO says, you are, but we have this little issue that we need to focus on. And that can be a source of consternation, especially within the technical function. But we've seen where this one-dimensional view can create challenges. If the organization had a mature cybersecurity program, more than likely they would not have been a breach. This is true for any number of famous breaches such as Drizzly, Change Healthcare, Equifax, and many more. In many cases, they're severely anemic or minimal cybersecurity programs. On the flip side, though, are CISOs that have pressures against speaking up. And this is where we're going to focus our attention today, as it's a pervasive problem in our industry. To support this discussion, we have two CISOs who have lived through those challenges and have learned from experience different approaches that management can take to speaking up in order to balance doing the right thing with handling the possibility of a resume generating event caused by speaking up. So the two people today, I'm going to let them introduce themselves because there's no way I could do justice to who they are. We have Josh Copeland and Ashok Kukani. So I'm really excited about that because both of them have a lot of experience. Josh, do you want to go ahead and kick us off here today?
Sure. I'm Josh Copeland. I am the Director of Cybersecurity at Crescendo AI. I'm also a Professor of Cybersecurity at Tulane University.
Hi, this is Ashok Kukani. I'm based in Dallas, Texas. Overall 28 years experience. I played different roles. Initially started as a product development engineer and then later moved into cybersecurity. Been in the cybersecurity for last 18 years, worked for top 5 banks, top 5 insurance company in my previous roles. The last 5-6 years, primarily providing advisory and transformation services for enterprise customers. Happy to be part of a conversation today.
Thank you so much, both of you. So let's go ahead and jump right into setting the stage, just so people have a context. Sanitized, of course, I don't want to tie this to any specific company, where you spoke up and it caused a problem for yourself. And did you have any trepidation related to the event? How did you handle it? And what were some of the outcomes that you had as a result of speaking up? Ashok, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so one of the company when I joined, what we did was primarily did a quick NIST assessment on how good are the IT and security controls, and then I shared the report to the leadership team. And then I think that did not go well because till that particular point they were showing that everything is good on the IT security controls perspective, and then when I exposed that the controls are not up to the standard as per the NIST framework, then it actually caused some issues. And then the second one is we actually also did a phishing simulation against some of the communications, and then it actually came back saying that HR came back saying that hey, a lot of employees reach out to us about some bonus package, etc., and then that's caused some issues. So the lessons learned from that is that before you present it to it, have a review internally with the other stakeholders and make sure that they are aligned with that. And if it requires some way of communicating in a different format, it's better to do that one.
Sure. If you don't mind, I'd like to dive just a little bit further into that because I think everybody knows they should be getting the buy-in of the people around them to validate that they're okay with the findings. What do you do? Have you had a situation with that where, say, somebody disagreed with the findings to a great degree where you know they were trying to say that X is true, but X minus 10 was actually the truth? There was definitely a real gap that they were trying to cover up. How did you handle that in that situation?
So primarily what we had is no, I think that was there, right, where they were trying to cover their base. And then, right, so because there is no point in arguing on that particular point in time. So what we actually did was, rather than disagreeing on that context, what we decided on the call is primarily going forward. We want to have an ITSM change management process who document exactly how many vulnerabilities have been accepted before the product goes into production. So the issue was primarily on the vulnerabilities not getting remediated before it goes into production. And then, right, what we put a new process is primarily, okay, no, everything has to be there in the change management process saying that these many vulnerabilities are accepted. And then you have the report attached as part of the change request before it went into production.
Okay, so you were working it from a process perspective. Hey, we recognize we've got a gap, but some of that gap was on our side. We'll fix that and create a mutually agreeable approach.
Right, because otherwise it's a blame game that no, hey, this report was 4 days before the release, but when the happened, the issues were already been remediated, right? So to
Sure.
avoid that conflict, we put that saying that okay, this is the change, this is the last attachment before the production change, right? So that way there is no conflict because now everything sits in one change management documented process so that at any point in time, we can go back and then we have a baseline to validate against.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Josh, how about you? I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, so I'll take it back and go to a previous organization I was in that was, very, very heavily into checkbox compliance. All they did really was chase the attestations that we all see that everyone has, and they weren't really great at selecting the right organization to do that. So you're getting a lot of what I call wet paper bag attestations where they existed, but they did absolutely nothing to actually show what your level of security maturity was. And that was kind of their thing is they wanted the piece of paper so they could sell more, but didn't really care about the overall cybersecurity maturity. And when I kind of brought this up, I'm like, I've looked at these, I've done audits for years and years. The artifacts that were submitted are not things that other audit firms that I know of, and I would not have accepted as an auditor. And I kind of got a, stay in your lane, classic deflection from the organization. We have the attestation, so just let it be. And that caused some friction because I was brought in from their entire ethos was to help them mature their cybersecurity program. And this was actively working against me to do that. Fortunately, a few months later, after some actual legitimate compliance gaps came up and they noticed that there were real world exposures related to the things I was talking about, then I got some traction and they eventually switched to a more robust auditing firm when I kind of had the conversation with them that you want a audit firm that goes very, very hard, very, very deep and has a high level of standard for passing because a SOC 2 doesn't count if anybody who reads the report that knows anything goes, this is completely worthless. And then even worse, if you have a SOC 2 and you still get breached, the SOC 2 didn't mean anything either. It makes you slightly more defensible in court, but then they're going to go after the quality of the audit. So it was an interesting perspective to have them eventually, after me pointing out these gaps here, gaps there, where I kind of put it that truth always sounds like rebellion when you're built on comfort for the organization. If this is what we've always done and we've always gotten the results that we wanted, if the nature of what you're saying goes against that, it's going to be a little bit prickly and you're going to have to find ways to cushion it in a way but still gets the right results.
Sure. So it sounds like that you took a little bit of the longer view, trying to create more of a process out of it and wait for something
Right.
to pop up. that you knew was material, and then you could demonstrate that by not dealing with the issue head on, but basically working around the issue.
Yeah. Sometimes, you have to know what the buy-in from the folks above you, and know whether you're going to be able to get buy-in right now. And sometimes figuring out what thing is going to eventually get them buy-in. Because without the buy-in, you're not going to have any kind of traction. You're not going to have the funding. You're not going to have the personnel, the headcount to do the things you need to do.
Sure, that makes sense. So let's jump into the reverse situation. If you've actually had this pop up where you did not speak up and you really should have, why did you not speak up, and what were the results that happened as a result of not speaking up?
So I guess I'll go
Please.
first. I think one time I was with a previous company. It was around burnout of my folks. I was a very new manager in that role due to the organization, was still getting my feet kind of under the ground from an organizational perspective. And I had a small team that was in a leverage model where they had multiple contracts they were all working on simultaneously. And there was just a lot of overworked engineers, people starting to cut corners, and I didn't raise it loudly enough. It was truly a thing where I knew this was a problem. I tried to do things I could within my control, but ultimately the fix was going to be either reduce the number of contracts per person or hire more headcount to spread that level of work out more evenly. And I kind of rationalized it of it's not my place to determine, what proper headcount was. I need to protect the systems, not the people. And the silence of my decision, because I didn't speak up, I voted for status quo. And I did have issues where people burned out, and we had an issue where one of the contracts had a coverage gap because we were very, very thin margin, had only two people. One person got very, very sick. Another person had to take out because they had to have a surgical procedure. So I literally had nobody to cover that because I wasn't managing that properly. So that was a time that I wish I would have spoke up sooner and not had to pay the consequences of not doing so.
Sure. And I think that's a painful lesson. What's one lesson you got out of that?
For me, my lesson on that was it is better to raise the concern, flag it, and be told, no, you can't fix it, than not do that and be burned later. If I would have raised it earlier, I would have had it documented that this is
Sure.
a potential flaw. When it happened, I could point back and say, I told you on this date, this date, this date that this was a potential problem. These were the things I was seeing. And I was just very new, very early in my career at that point where I wasn't comfortable enough having a voice to say this is what was wrong. So for me, it was just speak up when there's a problem, no matter where you think you are on the problem fixing chain. Because if you don't speak up, you'll never know what the end results are going to be.
Sure. Ashok, how about you in not speaking up? Is there a point in time where you didn't speak up and you really should have? And how did that affect you?
Yeah, so I think one of the same situation where there was a production release, and I think the our security team did not give a sign off for that release to happen, but I think the IT team took a decision to go forward with the change, and then so it was communicated to me later, and then so when I had a conversation with the CTO, he told that he's going to send a communication to the leadership team. Right. So I just thought, okay, he's going to do it rather than me escalating it. Unfortunately, he did not do that on a timely basis. And then later in the leadership team, when that conversation came in, the question was asked to me that why you did not communicate that, right? So, but I think that's one thing I learned is you cannot just go by somebody's words, or at least have something to support you, maybe an email communication within you and the other persons, so that at least you have an email try to support you. So that is one thing I learned, that okay, just a conversation on phone or in a meeting without some supporting evidence, my email trail is going to backfire on you.
Sure. And I think that's a really good lesson learned that you have there, because I think everybody's been through that. You've got to cover yourself with that email trail for so many different reasons.
Yes.
But Let's go ahead and move a little bit around the cultural and sometimes the psychological aspects of speaking up. You know, anybody who's been in the CISO role has dealt with, or should I say more than likely, has dealt with toxic cultures. I've even seen this in the banking industry. I was talking to somebody, I'm going to call it a Fortune 1000, but they had said that their whole GRC program started creating a whole toxic atmosphere between IT and the cybersecurity teams, in which case nobody wants to speak up anymore, which is what happened. So in your stories, there's obviously a little bit of psychological and cultural influence to the challenges that you faced.
Yeah, so maybe the way how we have seen is that every leadership team have a bunch of slides, right? More of a matrix, and we have seen is that whoever goes first, right, they get roasted, and then right the meeting gets 15 on almost 90% of the time is done with the first matrix itself, right? And then the remaining people primarily don't get time to even communicate on that particular one. But from whoever is presenting the data, I think, right, the whoever wants to go first, right, I think they are the one who gets panicked, and then right next time they don't want to be on the call to try to be the first one to take up the conversation. So that was one of the challenge I've seen, right? More become toxic there, where everybody corners that particular person who is reporting on some data. So to address that issue, we pretty much had like more like a timer, primarily saying that, okay, right, if we have 10 action items, so right, we are going to only give 5 minutes for each, not more than that. If there is any other conversation which needs to happen, that can happen outside that particular meeting, but not just right bombarding hundreds of questions against one person for the whole hour. So that is something we put a process around. So most of the places where I've seen is that unless you have that people and process changed, I think any technology implementation is going to have problems.
Sure. I like the lesson learned that you pulled out of that too, and what your company did to start to resolve some of those issues. And I can see how that could start to add over time, because that is a little bit of a toxic situation that you're dealing with. And I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, they didn't get buy-in from the other team members in order to present the information. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I figured. So, Josh, how about you? What are your thoughts here?
So, I like to kind of frame things as cybersecurity isn't just technical, particularly inside an organization when you're the senior cybersecurity leader. It's a lot more, psychological warfare within your organization to a degree. You have to look for all these signs of dysfunction, fear-based leadership, passive compliance, performative reporting, toxic optimism, where everything's fine, no one's targeting us. And you have to kind of feel where the vibe of your organization is and read it a bit like telemetry. You have to determine, are people whispering more than they're whiteboarding? If that's the case, there's some fear-based issues within that organization, and you have to kind of figure out, how do I address the issues while also addressing that root conversation of fear? So taking that strategy, you have to kind of look at, how do I affect cultural change? Because culture always beats strategy 100% of the time. So how can I take this pieces of information and figure out ways to have the right conversations with the right people, get some allies very early on where you built trust and dynamic with them, that you care about their problems and you're not just, there to sit on your ivory tower on high, issuing out cybersecurity dictates. It's really about finding those folks that you can become allies with and then leveraging that to build more allyship across the organization.
Thank you. And I think that's a really interesting side of the house too, when you look at that toxic leadership, because it's very common throughout so many organizations. Are there limits though to how far you would go with that? For example, I've seen some places where they're going to sweep all IT, all the problems behind them. It's wonderful. And it's severe in reporting into them. And they don't want to share any of that because they're concerned about toxicity from above them. Because usually toxicity is not on one level within organizations. It's on multiple levels. Did that play into some of your discussion that you're talking there, or how did you manage to handle some of that in the situation you're in?
So ultimately, one of my big mantras is, when honesty is not seen as valuable, I'm in the wrong ecosystem. So I will quickly find my way into a new place where I don't have to have those uphill battles. But a lot of times it's a simple fact of people just don't understand what the problems are. And it comes back down to that root concept of fear. If I can go ahead and explain what the risks are, quantify it in terms that they understand, figure out, oh, if you're a car guy, I'm going to use car terms. If you're a 18th century French literature, I'll hit up ChatGPT and figure out, make analogies that way. But it's truly just trying to find those allies where you can. And ultimately, if you can't find those allies, you're not going to be able to change the problem. And if you can't get allies at your level, you're not going to be able to build allies at a level above you.
Sure. I think that's very useful. Let's get a little bit further into the reporting lines. I've worked with CISOs that, for example, are not allowed to report into the board of directors. There are other issues going on there because boards should be talking to the CISOs, in my personal opinion, for a lot of different reasons. But like, for example, then it gets filtered. It goes from the CISO to sometimes the CTO, then the CIO, then the CEO, and each one is going to do their filtering. And then it gets to the board of directors. And there are some CISOs that do report in, but then that filtering that's going on above them ends up creating a lot of challenges because there's so much hidden. By the time you get down to the nugget of truth, it's very minimal. Have you dealt with a situation like that, especially reporting into a technical line, whether you've either reported to board of directors and your senior management want to filter it? How have you handled that, and what have you done to work around some of those, communication challenges? Because the board really does need to know some of those types of things.
Yeah, so I've been on the both sides of the puzzle, right? So one is like when I directly report to the board. So one thing what I have done it is primarily shared the slides at least 1 week before the board meeting that, and then wherever possible, try to schedule for a one-on-one with those main people, right, who normally ask a lot of questions so that right you try to address most of their questions before the board meeting so that it's going to be more of a validation during the call rather than having bunch of back and forth conversation or argument during that session. So that is one way how I have addressed primarily reporting to the board. And then the second one is where I have 2 or 3 levels or X level of channels to the board. The one way I have asked them is that, is there any access to the slides which were presented and a snapshot of what was communicated during that particular window, right? So that way, if there is a write-up or if there is a action items or what are the success stories, what has been delivered, at least I get a snapshot of what has been communicated. So if something was missed, then I can add it as part of the next board level meeting. So that's how I was trying to get a feedback from them on the slides or what has been presented and what was the outcome from the meeting side of it.
Sure. We'll come back to that because I think that's an interesting story. Josh?
Yeah. For me, one of the first things I do is I go and have conversations with all the directors and figure out what their priorities are, and particularly what the priorities of the board is. That way, I truly understand how to communicate to them in a way that is native to them. So I'm going to redefine all my cybersecurity stuff from, IT hygiene or cybersecurity compliance, and I'm going to translate that into business risk because that's what they're going to resonate most with. And I'm not going to send them a lot of dashboards that are going to have all things about vulnerabilities and time to patch. I'm going to talk dollars and cents, downtime, and decisions that we need to make. So kind of use that board dialect where cybersecurity risk is really more like financial exposure rather than packet loss. Because our boards don't speak in CVE, they speak in ROI, RTO, and reputation. So when I can cycle back and tie everything back to those things that they care about, particularly things they specifically care about that they've talked about in previous board settings, or the things that they're talking about when they're giving presentations to other organizations, that becomes absolutely critical in having that right communication. And to my peers' point, having the conversations before you present to the board is absolutely critical because I want to make sure that I'm not going to present something that is going to be perceived as truly negative to the board by another peer, because that's just going to create friction that I don't need at that level. I want to have that kind of worked out ahead of time before we get to that level. And if it comes down to where we have a strong disagreement on something, I might still have to present that to the board, but at least I'm prepared for that level of friction when that's presented.
Sure. And I think that's a kind of the key one, this last element that you were focusing on, that friction that's there, because that goes back to people wanting to sweep stuff under the carpet, and it's going to come in. That can create something. So if you're reporting into that person who disagrees with you and you speak up, that could be a resume generating event. You're willing to put yourself on the line to tell the truth in that particular case.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where there are a few things in life that you truly own. Your name and your reputation is really the only two.
Sure.
I'm going to be truthfully and brutally honest about where our posture is, because that's my fiduciary duty to make sure that you understand what risks we have and where those risks are being taken.
Sure, absolutely. So that kind of gets into the next question. So Ashok, I'm going to jump back to you. So tying in those fiduciary duties in those situations, how has that affected the conversations that you've been in? Knowing that you've got these duties. And I'm going to put something out there as well. A lot of CISOs that I've talked to, and the first time I was a CISO, I did not understand my fiduciary duties. But it's something that I've learned over a period of time and now educate others on. But knowing that you have those fiduciary duties, if you're presenting the information up to the people on your team, do you feel that's sufficient from a fiduciary standpoint, or do you work things out with a lawyer ahead of time to say, hey, is this okay if I do this? I know they're presenting bad information or they're filtering, so it's kind of on them. But you how do you cover yourself from that fiduciary standpoint when you are unable to communicate what's actually happening if it's a material deficiency?
Yeah, so I think few of the things is that, right? I think the first one I learned, right, is more of a email communication. So make sure that at least you cover your base, that okay, whatever you have identified has been communicated to the right audience, right? And then the second one is always try to have the audit or compliance team on your side, because right, sometimes, right, you as a security person identifying something, but if you have an audit or compliance team vouching for that, saying that, okay, as part of the audit, we found this particular gap and this needs to be remediated or getting added into the risk register. So now it's indirectly going into that particular visibility channel side of it. So that's how I try to address it, without affecting anybody, just put some process in. And then if things doesn't happen, I think, right, most of the enterprise customers have a whistleblower program. So I think that is one other way of communication, right? So the whoever is reporting will be able to do it anonymously, so that there is some action which can be taken around that.
Sure. And sometimes I've seen that can have some blowback. I'm going to use an example I heard from somebody else. They were dealing with the three lines model, probably defense at the time. And what happened was the security was reporting into internal audit, and there's a report. The IT team, the CIO, took a look at the report and told the CISO, "You better not, share this report with anybody." Of course, he shared it up to internal audit, who shared it with the entire board. And that just created a highly toxic, highly negative situation. And the CISO was very confident in what he was saying in this particular case. That's, part of the challenges when you're dealing with organizational politics, is getting beyond that. And I guess this is kind of a question for both of you, but I'll start with you, Ashok. Have you dealt with a situation like that? Because you're kind of circumventing it and going around. And he was doing what he was supposed to do. He was giving the information to his reporting officer. And that still
Yeah.
created a
So
lot of consternation. So I'd love to hear your viewpoint there.
yeah, I think that's definitely, I've seen that situation. I think, right, the only way it can be addressed is primarily having both of them in the same conversation meeting, right? So the way it's that, okay, if I report to a chief auditor, and then, right, the CTO directly tells me, then, right, I'll schedule for a call with all three of us and then primarily run through what are the findings, and then, right, what is his input, so that, right, we also put that information in that, saying that this meeting happened, And these are the action item for them, right? So sometimes what happens is that no, they don't have resources to do it, but at least in that actionable items, we are also communicating to the board or the leadership team saying that we did have the conversation and this is going to be addressed in the next 3 to 6 months. And what is the risk associated to it? Maybe the available resource availability is limited. In that particular case, they need a temporary resource, or sometimes what I have done it is primarily whenever there is a dependence with another departments, one of my budget have a resource who can be aligned as part of their team so that they can help remediating those things. So every time whenever I do a budget, I always set aside a resource cost who can be part of their team to help remediate those issues.
Sure. And so what you're trying to do is recognizing that there's going to be some damage. You use your emotional intelligence. You come in, you bring in and say, hey, this is a negative report. It's point in time. The report is over, but let's talk about the findings and what we're doing and trying to make this as proactive as possible on your side so you're presented in the best possible light.
Yes,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, right, it's they have to cover their base and
Sure.
also, right, they want to protect their position. So how do you make sure that you're still communicating but also supporting them, right? So if you make them successful, then they will try to make you successful too.
Sure. Thank you. Josh.
So I take a look at my fiduciary duty and kind of frame it in the perspective of it is my ethical obligation, and in some cases, my legal obligation to act in the best interest of the organization. And oftentimes that comes in direct conflict with paycheck, politics, and the larger thing of bonuses. You'll see a lot of folks who will do a lot of things to protect their bonus because that's, what is their key interest. So I look at it and try to take it and look at it, view it as mission alignment and not compliance theater. What can I do that is ethical? What can I do that is going to make the organization better, more compliant, or at least compliant to the requirements that it needs to have? And if I can't do that because I have somebody who's blocking or wants to block me, my ethical obligation under my financial duties trump their, trying to protect their budget or their bonus. So that's kind of you got to speak up because ultimately it is your money, your, potential jail time that comes into play. And you run into the cases like this where, a CISO reports to a CIO who have fundamentally, different perspectives on things. Your CIO cares about availability. That's their number one thing. Are the things up? Are they running? Are they doing the things that need the mission to happen? So those looking more confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And sometimes, like anything else in security, the more secure it is, the harder it is to use. The less secure it is, the easier it is to use. And you have to find that balance for your organization. If you're working underneath a CFO, they're going to have their own priorities on how their budget happens. However, if I'm that named CISO, I have my own duties. And even if I do report to you, I'm going to report the truth, even if it's ugly, because that's my job. And ultimately, I'm not going to tell you this is bad without giving you, at least a handful of options of here's how we can address this, whether it's outright accepting the risk because that's what the business desires, or here's ways we can do, small mitigation now, big fix later, or here's how we can go all in and fix this and 3 other problems at the same time. I'm going to present options because I don't want to be the person who just comes to the board and says, there are 12 problems and I can't fix any of them. I want to come to the board and say, here are 12 problems. Here are 6 fixes that fix, 70% of them. Here's 2 that I think that based off of the organization's risk tolerance, we could probably accept that risk and just document that. So we have our, documentation in place where if something bad does happen, we can say, we knew about it, we evaluate it, we accept the risk, and here are the 30 reasons why we accepted that risk, and kind of go to it from that perspective, because ultimately our job, regardless of what your C title is largely about risk management, understanding where your risks are, which risk you're willing to accept to further the company's goals. So taking that tact, will tend to give you better feedback.
And I think that's an important point to remember. And so when you're talking about the risk, because I like to define, okay, who's the risk owner and so on, because you make sure that everybody's very clear on that. Because does the board own the risk? Is it owned at the CEO level? And a lot of this stuff is going to depend on the organization. And a lot of times there's challenges because those aren't defined. I mean, if I'm walking into an organization, for example, that doesn't have those defined, what I like to do is start to develop that governance ahead of time in order to define whose responsibility it is. And so things become very clear from that perspective. There are always some that are going to go a step further. Like, for example, I was talking with a CIO, and this particular CIO is starting a brand new job. They were talking to a CISO who has been in the role for a long time, and the CIO asked, "Do we have any vulnerabilities?" And the CISO responded, "We don't have any," totally freaked out in a situation like that. I actually was talking about this with somebody else, and they said that was a fear response that they had, absolute fear of even saying anything that might possibly be negative. I have a lot of sympathy. I don't know what happened to this person, but I imagine they had something traumatic happen to them to cause them to say something that's so patently ridiculous. And for those who are listening who may not know, every single organization has vulnerabilities. To say that you don't have any would be absolutely ridiculous because it's always growing, or you might be remediating them all the time. Like, I knew one organization, they said within 2 days, they would remediate all vulnerabilities, even the low vulnerabilities. Most organizations can't meet that. That is just absolutely impossible in most cases, in many cases. In some cases, it's perfectly fine. But that does create some challenges. So Josh, you were talking, and both of you actually talked a little bit on getting into the influence tactics, because I think, this poor CISO, whatever he went through, and I don't know who he is nor the name of the company, but, because you're getting into a lot of the language and the persuasion strategies. And Ashok, you were talking about that really well with how you're going to deal with that with the CIO, CTO, et cetera. Are there other strategies you think that are helpful to acknowledge those uncomfortable truths without bringing up and triggering that sort of defensive response that you're going to get from everybody else?
So normally what I have done is primarily identifying one of the liaison in each and every department who can actually vouch for you. So that way, at least, right, you have some mechanism to, right, improve your security initiatives, right? And then the second approach, what I normally try to do is primarily, okay, align your project initiative for the year with the business initiatives, right? Whether if they are, I'm just giving you an example, if the technology is trying to do a tech upgrade from on-prem to cloud, right? Then you align some of your security initiatives as part of that, so that now it goes into that particular initiative with that dependency going away. Instead of completely trying to do something which is not aligned with that business project initiatives. And wherever possible, align some of your resources to work closely with them so that they can be successful or they can meet the milestone within that agreed SLA. So that's how I have done it, where it has been more successful, because if you have your own objective, but it's not aligned with the other C-level executive objective, then there is always a conflict because they cannot put their resource into your project, derailing their planned projects wherever possible.
So one of the terms I've heard around that is the mission critical objectives, which some businesses are very explicit in defining those. I think like the BIA is a good place to define those. And then if you have those within, sometimes we'll put into the disaster recovery plan. But if you have those prioritized, or even if there's new initiative that comes in, how do you prioritize this? What are the risks? And then you get into strong risk management conversations. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, right.
Okay. Thank you. Josh?
So, what language or persuasion strategies we use really depends on what the landscape is. I tend to use kind of 4 as my primary. One is kind of reframing it. This isn't a security issue. It's a business resilience issue, and tie everything back to how this affects the business. As CISOs, we tend to get very locked in on all the technical bits and bytes, and that's great for the folks that are below us because they speak that language, they understand it, But for our peers and the folks that we report to, that's a totally foreign language. I might as well be speaking Klingon to them. So I need to make sure that I talk to them in things that they understand. And business resilience is a key thing. The second one I like to use is, I humanize it. This is how it's going to affect our people. This is how it's going to affect our profit margin. This is how it's going to affect our ability to operate. Here's what's going to happen to the people in our organization if this goes horribly wrong. Then my other tactic is, financialize it. This control isn't going to be a cost. It's insurance, and here's why it's insurance for our organization. Because that kind of ties into my final one of previewing fallout. If we do nothing or we don't do the right thing, this is what tomorrow's headline is going to look like. And there are lots of examples I can go call from, any business. You can find a near peer who has suffered a breach, been a headline, they've seen it on CNN or Financial Times, or insert whatever journal you want here. And you can look at real costs associated with that and say, here's what's going to happen if we don't do this. I can't tell you when it's going to happen. I can just tell you with a high degree of certainty, it will eventually happen if we don't address these risks. So it's kind of that understanding that data wins arguments, but your stories win budget.
Totally agree. And I think both of you have brought a lot to the table in terms of changing that conversation within cybersecurity. And I think those are really critical things. There are a lot of things that I teach a lot of the CISOs how to do, because you've got to be able to tell those business stories. Both of you provide like one example of a story that you used that managed to influence your business and or the board, and maybe even people underneath you or to the left and right of you as well.
So normally what I try to do is that, right, every time whenever I go to a board, I take a case study, right? Hey, this is a scenario like, no, I don't call out that name, but I say that, hey, this is a fintech company who had a recent impact, and these are the primary reason it happened. And then, right, what are the security controls we have it in place to avoid that particular situation? And then where are the gaps, so that in case if we need additional budget, you have that saying that currently we have a gap in this one. This is the reason why I want this particular project to be completed, so that, right, we reduce the risk. So that way you have the risk register, you have a case study, so that way we will be able to take it in and also give a more of a comparative score saying that this is, we are in this particular vertical, let's say fintech vertical, and then currently our security score is X compared to the the other companies we are in the same space. So we are in the top 20%, or we are in the middle 30%, or we are in the bottom 50%. So that way they always have a baseline against the industry, and then, right, not just going on a random number. So that's how I normally go against any of those conversations.
Josh?
I do many similar things. Definitely go out and do my near peer research and say, this is where, these third parties have rated their security posture based off of the public available information or the information that they have access to through the tooling that they have. But again, using storytelling, if I were to go to do a board presentation right now, I would absolutely be highlighting the Jaguar scenario where they've been down for, weeks and weeks because of a cybersecurity related issue, and what that real cost is to their business operations, and see kind of why that changes their mindset, because it's all about building trust through transparency. When I tell you no, I'm going to tell you why I'm saying no and back that up with, here is legitimate concerns. Here are the case studies that say, this is what has happened to other organizations who have accepted this type of risk. So it's not just, the CISO on their ivory tower saying no. It's, we're making a business risk together, and we have a conversation where you can come back to me and say, okay, I understand that. Is there a way we can implement something similar to this that's in a more safe and sane kind of way? So it comes back to mapping those cybersecurity goals to the organization goals with uptime, revenue, and compliance, and creating empathy between the teams. You want to be the cybersecurity leader who goes, I understand what you're trying to do. Let me help you do it in a way that's not going to get any of us fired.
Sure, I think that's very valuable. So both of you have provided a lot. We knew we've talked a lot about different subjects and things like that. So let's get into some final thoughts here. So if you could prepare a CISO for handling a toxic culture when walking into it, what would be your top advice and why?
Yeah, I think that the top advice from my side, like if somebody is getting into a toxic, one is primarily, okay, cover your base. Make sure that any communication you have is right, not just on a phone conversation. Just make sure you have an email conversation, and no, primarily, no, have some additional people to support you. So if you are having conflict with the CTOs, then that means you need to have a legal or an audit or a compliance team beyond your side. So that way, right, you're not alone and you have somebody to support you. So I think that will be my immediate or quick advice.
Absolutely. Thank you. Josh?
So document everything, find some allies who are not echoes of the rest of the organization, detach emotionally. Don't let other people's views of the cybersecurity organization affect your personal worth. Lead anyway. Culture change starts when one person decides that what's comfortable is no longer acceptable currency in the organization. So be the change that you want, not just sit in the rot that you're already in.
Well, thank you so much. I think both of you brought a tremendous amount to the table. There's a lot of alignment between your perspectives, and I think that's very valuable. I think people who are listening to this are going to get a lot of tips and advice from both of you. So I felt like both of you really had something to share with other people, and I want to thank everybody for your time today. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for having me, Matthew.